New Buddha Way Dharma Talks. Geoff Hunt presents a talk on some aspect of the Buddha's teaching.
Good morning. I thought it'd be appropriate today to talk about peace. I hadn't really connected it in my thoughts with what we're doing in New Buddha Way. And I think it's appropriate perhaps to make some sort of connection. The International Peace Day was a resolution of the United Nations in 1981. That's now 40 years. And the idea is this: the International Day of Peace shall be observed on the 21st of September, which was Monday, each year. And this date is to be brought to the attention of all peoples for the celebration and observation of peace. As I say, we missed it on Monday, but Monday we probably wouldn't have been getting together anyway. So it'd be good to have a conversation about how we can connect with it, because it is actually, it's not just a talking shop. If you look at their website, then you will find that there are lots of things going on, practical things for children, for example, for the poorer countries and the lack of resources, as well as looking to find truces where there is conflict. So, you'll remember that if New Buddha Way has a clear statement in a few words, it is this: we emphasize peace, compassion, and wisdom. So peace has always been there, and it's hard to see how it could not be there when we consider that ultimately the whole practice is about attaining peace. So I'll come back to you on that and talk with the trustees about whether we can take up something on Peace Day every year. So that'll be next year now, 21st of September. Of course, we're a small organization and we have plenty to do, but we'll see what people think about it and how important it might be. Okay, so I'm going to talk about peace, and I'll invite you to talk about peace. First thing to be said about peace is a very big word. It covers a lot of things, but it helps to divide it into some simple categories. What is it the opposite to? I often ask myself this question because it often clarifies what we're talking about. So the opposite of peace would be, socially, for example, it might be hostility and war. Psychologically, it would be ill will towards others, non-cooperation, for selfish reasons. It could result in the violence of war, of course, which the human race has carried around its neck now for several thousand years. We could talk about whether violence is actually built into the human psyche or not. Some people will say that it is, and others will say that it's not. So there's plenty to discuss there. Got a little framework. We could distinguish between subjective peace, objective peace, and non-dual peace. Subjective peace is the peace within each one of us, or what we search for as peace. It is the calmness, stillness, and equanimity of mind that each one of us can search for and practice and attain changes in the way they're living. I quite like the phrase contentious living. I think it was used by maybe Ajahn Chah or Bhikkhu Bodhi anyway. Contentious living captures the way in which conflict and hostility seems to become routinized or the normal way of living. That is, all of us live with contentious living. There's some contention. And I'm including myself here. I come from a very big family. There's contention within a family. There's contention at work. There's contention with neighbors. When is there not contention? So from a mindfulness point of view, we have plenty of work to do, just thinking how can I bring this boiling ferment down a bit here? You know, starting with contention with myself, beating myself up, perhaps, feeling, you know, low self-worth or whatever. Contention with my family, contention with my friends, contention with my workmates, contention then between countries, and now we're getting into objective peace. By objective peace or objective hostility, we mean that which is out there. I don't feel it's anything to do with me. It's just it just exists. So then the question arises whether all hostility does ultimately rest in me as much as in anybody else. And there's always something I can do, even if it's only to join an NGO and send £10 a month or whatever it is, UNICEF or whatever other organization is working for peace. So subjective peace is the peace that you have to find within. Objective peace is what we see going on with others, especially in the social or political realm, and questions arising about whether it's human nature or not. I don't know how far that takes us. Then we could talk about the relationship between the subjective and the objective. How much can an individual do? Or is any boundary to what an individual can do? Then non-dual peace means not thinking in terms of subject and object of a distinct separation between the individual and society, but rather that it's all one. It's humanity that we should be talking about. And that is what the United Nations is trying to do with this resolution. Now, we live in a cynical age, and many people say, well, that's not going to work, is it? You know, we've tried it. Look how we fail. And they will point out failures, seem to forget to point out the successes, but they point out failures, say in Burundi or somewhere like that. One thing is for sure, cynicism makes things worse. And it makes it very difficult for those people who are trying to do the right thing with others. So we have to put all cynicism aside and think, you know, that together we can make a difference. And what I've just said is actually more important now than it has been for quite a few years. When we look at the state of relationship between nations and between people and classes and races, you know, there's plenty of scope for hostility and war. It's only recently we've come out of 2 world wars. Do we really want to see a third one? It'll be a hell of a show, won't it, with nuclear weapons? So what have I got to do with that, is a question we should all ask. What have I got to do with that? If there is contention in my mind, if I'm given to contention, am I not just one that's contributing to a whole sea of contention, a storm of contention? There's a lot to think about. So you might say that the Buddha's ultimate concept, whatever, I have to be careful what word we choose here, his broadest practical concept would actually be peace, because he used the metaphor of nirvana as some kind of snuffing out of a fire. But you know, where there's war and contention, there is metaphorically always fire. And what we're seeking is to cool things down. Don't we say that? Calm down, cool off. Yes, that's what nirvana is a cooling off. It's completely cool, right? So there is nothing more important, ultimately, in the Buddha's teaching than calmness, cooling off. There's some interesting things to say about that. We could think about the conditions of not peace. What conditions does hostility arise? I don't know why we often seem to miss this, when it's pretty obvious if you examine what arises socio-psychologically before a war happens. Very often there is humiliation. If you humiliated people, then there will be a reaction and everyone will get hurt. Don't humiliate people in the smallest way. Don't humiliate your husband or wife. Don't humiliate your children. Now, humiliation can be very small in appearance. It could just be making fun of somebody, and making fun of that person becomes routine and becomes hurtful. So, the roots of hostility are within us. So we have to find them and recognize them. Otherwise, we talk about peace, but we don't actually live it out in our minds and in our actions. Resentment against past injustice, when people have suffered injustice, for example, slavery. How do you think they feel? It's understandable that there will be a reaction, and that reaction may be violent. On the other hand, there may be a perfectly peaceful reaction, sometimes called passive resistance. So there is a way to counter social injustice without bringing violence into it. Lots of things to think about when we talk about peace, on the subjective level, the objective level, and on the Dharma level. Now we're seeing the phenomenon of dictators. And we see in each one of these ridiculous characters, ridiculous but dangerous characters, one outstanding quality that they have, or this quality, if there's such a word, and that is ego and pride. Often it verges on narcissism, which is a kind of personality disorder. And yet we have to ask ourselves, why is it that so many people would support a leader of that kind? It becomes very, very dangerous. When not only am I living in contention, but I have contention within me, but then I go out into the streets and support contention and fan the flames. And so it gets worse and worse. And everybody suffers. There are no winners. No winners on either side. It's also pretty clear that we're pretty hung up on boundaries. In fact, we only make up a sense of reality through boundaries in our thinking, which we talked about yesterday, actually, in the root session. Some of you will be perhaps happy to come to later on, once you've absorbed some of the basics of the Buddha's teaching. Boundaries. There are linguistic boundaries, there are class boundaries, there are educational boundaries, there are power boundaries, there are money boundaries. It seems we can't live without putting things into categories, into boxes, and then taking them very seriously as reality. The very concept of property. How real is that? It's purely a mental construction, which is then enacted. There is no such thing as property, except in our minds, but it's built around boundaries. A lot of the Buddhist teaching, actually, it can easily be missed, is about eroding boundaries and living in peace. Where you will find contention, you will find a boundary, and a boundary be taken too seriously. What boundary is worth killing for or dying for? We human beings don't look very rational when you consider things in this way. Okay. Now, in terms of practice and the Dharma, there's a teaching there that is quite profound. And Ajahn Chah, the Theravada Arahat, who died some years ago, a few years ago, and who has a huge following internationally, and is the founder, of course, of Citta Viveka Monastery, which is very close to us, about an hour's drive away. He taught that the mind is already peaceful. Its natural state is to be at peace. But it is disturbed like a still leaf in a gust of wind. This is a metaphor he gives. That a leaf will be still, will be quiet, won't move. Its natural state is to be like that, so it can absorb the carbon dioxide, which is very useful, sunshine, and so on. And then along comes a gust of wind, and it flaps about, and it flaps about, and it flaps about, maybe even be blown off the tree entirely. And the gust of wind dies back. And the point is, think in this way. Peace is actually our natural state. So we don't have to fight for peace. What a contradiction is that, to fight for peace? But you hear people saying it sometimes on CNN or whatever, that you have to fight for peace. You have to resist peace. You have to speak up about peace. But fighting for peace is falling into an old mental trap. And that is, where I'm hurt by somebody, I'm going to hurt that person. So we equalize. No, doesn't work that way. The mind is already peaceful, but is disturbed like a leaf in a gust of wind. Another useful thing that's said by some of the important teachers of meditation, that if we think non-dually, that is, not self, it is said, and I would agree, of course agree with them, that actually there is no path to peace. Now, it's all right to talk about a path to peace, that you should do this, you shouldn't do that, etc. It's a path to peace. But it's pointed out by these teachers that peace is the path. There's no path to peace, because that is objectifying it. The path is out there, and I'll decide whether to join it or not. No, the joining is the peace, is the act of peace. So peace is the path. Start now. It's about you. It's not taking on the whole world as one person. It's taking on the little bit of the world that is actually yours for a few years before you leave this world. What are you going to do with those years? Are we going to just go on adding to contention? Is that our natural state, to be at contentious living? I don't think so. I would follow these other teachers, saying what is natural is peace. The Buddha said this of a person of peace, whether a man or a woman. He said this of this person: abandoning false speech. Good place to start. We talked about that. Was it yesterday or whenever it was? No, day before or last week. We talked about speech. Now the Buddha says, abandoning false speech, he or she speaks the truth, adheres to truth, is trustworthy and reliable, one who is no deceiver of the world. Think of the power of that statement against what we take to be the opposite power. The opposite power is deceive the world as much as you like. If you can deceive a lot of people, you become powerful and famous. So you become the emperor of contention. Anyway, he says, one who is no deceiver of the world. He is one who reunites those who are divided. When people become divided, let's overcome our egos. Let's help to see into where their painful negativity is coming from, to bring people back together. So is a promoter of friendships who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. Wow. This is something that the Buddha said 2,500 years ago. How relevant is it for what we hear now on CNN and other international media? places like CNN or the BBC or any other media channel for that matter. But I just want to read that once again because it's somehow, you know, it's powerful, but it's also sad that we have to listen to this and pick up this teaching 2,500 years later. Abandoning false speech, he or she speaks truth, adheres to truth, is trustworthy and reliable, one who is no deceiver of the world. He is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. Isn't that one of the beautiful teachings of the Buddha? It gives us all hope. It gives us inspiration. So I want to finish with a key point here, as I like to do usually. One, think about, just become more aware of contentious living. Contentious living can be very minor things, like a squabble over who's going to wash the dishes. It starts there. It goes on to world wars. Dear, dear, dear. So be aware of contentious feelings and thinkings coming up in yourself, not just in others. Don't use what I'm telling you as some sort of stick to beat others with. Use it to look into yourself. Think about, well, we can have a whole talk about this one day, passive resistance, that I am not teaching passivity. Greater people than me, like Nelson Mandela or any of the greats, they put their life on the line to resist passively. They were resisting, all right, but they didn't use any violence. That must be the way forward. Protest, resist, but not with any kind of violence, because all one is doing is becoming exactly like the people that one is against, and one is stoking contention. Finally, in conflict, there are no winners. The one said to be the winner is also losing for what they have done. And now they feel arrogant. I am the powerful one. That's not winning. So there are no winners in conflict. Victims and victimizers both suffer. And that suffering may last a very long time. So look into yourself and find the peace. Let's meditate and be at peace. Let's learn to be at peace. Thank you very much.
New Buddha Way lets go of East and West and starts afresh in the life we have now. For more information, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.